The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Is There Evidence for God? A discussion between Matt Dillahunty and Satyan Devadoss.
Good to see you. Who said that? That was a loud voice. Way to go. A little violent yell goes a long ways. Hello, friends. So glad you're here tonight. I don't know if you heard this one. An atheist, a Christian, and a vegan walk into a bar. The only way I know this is because they all told everybody. Kind of fun? Maybe? No? Okay. We got vocal groups here, friends. The vegan was just to throw in. We are here tonight to have some fun, to have a conversation, to have a discourse. And so, to that end, a few ideas and ground rules for the evening. There is no winner and loser tonight. You can discuss it later as you like. But we don't want to do booing, heckling. You can clap as you feel led to, but not like State of the Union applauding where you stand up for your person whenever they make a point. Ideally, hold your applause to the end. We'd really like this to be a fun discourse, an interesting discourse. So to that end, what we're going to do, we're going to have our two gentlemen who I'll introduce in just a moment. They're each going to get 20 minutes to tackle a huge subject as they see fit. Then we're going to go to a small time of moderated questions with me and the guys. And then we're going to have time at the end for Q&A from you. So be thinking as you go along. And then they'll have about a minute at the end to tie it all up. So we are so glad you're here tonight. This is put on by Saratoga Federated Church, which is right here. But we're doing it here in this building because we want it to be a safe place. And we want it to be a place where we can have conversations of respect and really come with open minds and open hearts. So I hope that's true for everybody tonight, that you're willing to learn from each other. That's the only way empathy grows. That's the only way people change. So we're so glad you're here tonight. I want to introduce these two guys up. Come on up. First up. Yeah, whichever side you want to go to, Matt.
I got my tablet.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the important.
So two guys here tonight. You probably already know who they are because you signed up and you came. But this man, all you didn't know about him, he's from Texas, and that means I like him. I'm also from Texas. This is Matt Dillahunty. Take a seat, Matt. We don't. Matt, among many things, he's a speaker. He's a lecturer. He travels around the country and does this a lot, and he's really good at it. Super sharp guy. Got really good stuff to say. He is a podcaster. He has his own TV show. Anybody else in here have their own TV show? I didn't think so. Matt's got his own TV show in Austin. He's got a wife, Beth.
Yes.
I've heard they have a small zoo at their house with snakes and cats and other things. And this is not meant in a pejorative. I would almost call Matt an atheist pastor. And I say that because he teaches well to that end. He takes care of his people. He shows a lot of compassion for his people, and he builds community with his people. So that probably wouldn't sell as well, but I see that for Matt. He's passionate about his community and what he speaks for, and he speaks up for it. So I'm so thrilled that he's here. Y'all give him a round of applause.
I tend to use evangelical skeptic, but it all works.
Okay. And this is Sethan Devadoss. He is the Fletcher Chair of Mathematics at USD down in San Diego. I got to know him because he was here in town for about a year. He used to teach at Williams College on the East Coast, and he's a smart dude as well, and he teaches math, and he's a man of faith, and he's now at USD, and I asked him to come, and he's done some Veritas forums. I don't know if you've heard of those. So he's done some events kind of like this. Matt's done a lot of events like this. So it was a perfect match, and I'm so thrilled that both of you all are here, but y'all give a round of applause to Sethan. So again, the rules for the evening, let's have respect. We're going to have a conversation. There'll be time for Q&A, so start to think about those, and we will get to them the best we can. We have a handy-dandy timekeeper here, guys, so we'll try to stay on track for everybody. Ignore him if you like. I do that a lot. But just kidding, Rob. He's a good guy. And so first off, my friend, you may start.
How are you guys? Awesome, my friends. Great. First of all, I want to thank all those involved, tons of people behind the scenes. Can we just give them a hand? I don't know if they'll ever hear this again. So thank you. Thanks for Gabe for inviting me. He has been a person who has taken care of me and my family, protected us, shepherded us, and just honored to be here. I'm totally honored to be with Matt. It's a person who has actually devoted a great amount of time and energy in his life to think about these big questions, and I'm so excited that you guys are here to kind of wrestle with those things with us. It's also great to be in the South Bay again. A couple of years ago, I was on sabbatical at Stanford. We lived right in Santa Clara. We went to hung out in Saratoga a lot, so this is back home to me. My wife and kids are sort of jealous, right? Although San Diego is a great place, I hear, to live, it's not home yet for us. We've just been there for a couple of months, so we're excited. I'm excited to be here to represent my family here. Now, some of you might be wondering, as I am, why a math professor is speaking about God. Have you ever did that cross your mind? I mean, on one side, we have Matt, who actually has studied, thought about, he has a radio show, TV program, written about, has a community of people who he's training to think seriously about atheism. And I am training people to think about math. So why am I here? You know, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a philosopher. I don't devote my life to thinking about thoughts of heaven and death and the state of being, who we are, how we got here. I spend time thinking about this. That's right. So a couple of you guys are getting turned on by this. It's awesome. That is awesome. This is the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, one of the sexiest theorems ever created by man. And most of us probably don't get excited by this. Many of us might agree with Stephen Colbert when he said the equations are the devil's sentences. So why are we listening to a math professor who loves the Gauss-Bonnet theorem talk about God? This is part of what I want to talk about, in fact. You see, I think for thousands of years, the notions of truth and reality are linked together with the notion of God. But, my friends, we're in 21st century America. So reality nowadays is no longer measured by church or by holy days. What is real? Religion is no longer relevant. You know, religion is somehow like a scaffolding. It's just to hold things in place until we figure out stuff that's really going on, and then you can kind of take the scaffolding off. We now have reality, so why have this fake construct of God going around? You know, here's Michio Kaku, here's what he writes, superstar physicist. He writes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from divinity. You just wait long enough, and all the things you think you need God for or supernatural force for can be explained by technology and science. Religion is a placeholder. Science is the new measurement of reality. Black is the new white. Science is the new God. And math is the queen of sciences. And hence people think mathematicians deal with absolute truth. We try to explain everything through science. Here's what Bertrand Russell writes, superstar philosopher and mathematician at the turn of the century. He writes, whatever knowledge is attainable must be attained by scientific methods. And what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. That's the power of science today so far. My friends, let me just be really careful about here. I love science. It's a wonderful tool to measure things, to find patterns, to make predictions. Quantum mechanics is one of the most amazing, most detailed, predictable machinery we have in the history of the universe. And science, most importantly, has given me something that I totally love. It has given me a job. But science and math cannot answer questions about beauty. Here's a question for you. Are the Cubs more beautiful than the San Francisco Giants? Having grown up in Chicago, I can tell you the real answer afterwards if you're interested. Science cannot measure questions about morality. How should we value human life or other forms of life? Should we be a vegan? Is that important to us? That's not what science is designed to do. Science can't even answer questions about how to use its own creations. We create that atomic bomb through science. Should we or should we not use it? Science is mute on that point. We can use the power of anthrax in little pills and powders. Should we use it? Science is mute on that point. It can point us to things, but it is not powerful enough to tell us what to do with these things. Nowadays, scientists, just because they're scientists, are empowered to talk about theology and philosophy. Really? I mean, Richard Dawkins, superstar evolutionary biologist, brilliant man. What authority does he have to talk about death and life and morality? He has as much authority as the woman at the cafe or the guy at the bar. Same playing field. Now, although science is a great predictor, It has a deep secret. Here's the deep secret, especially in Silicon Valley and Stanford and this whole area, that drinks this drug of science. It deals with the easy, clean questions. That's what science does. Let me show you what I mean by the messiness of life and how science deals with things. This is a picture of my family. Yeah, it sounds great, doesn't it? Like, oh, yeah, I'll tell you the reality of what's going on. This is the scientific way my family looks like. It's kind of like the fish that's been gutted and deboned, and you can study what's really going on. But you know, this is a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old. There is no way those two humans can do this. That is an artificial construct photoshopped in. I am Indian. My wife is, she's born in the States. She's ethnically Chinese. We have these 3 kids, biological kids, and you have this little girl, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. She is by far my favorite. I make that clear to all my children. And just because of that, my life and her life is going to be messy. Can you imagine her growing up with an Indian dad, a Chinese mom, and weird kids going, what am I doing here in America? Right? It is a messy, disgusting thing, and that is what science cannot handle. It can't handle the mess of the world. You see, we have a messy world. We need to deal with messy things. I want a model. I want a theory. I want a story. I want a belief system that can handle all the full mess of reality. I don't just want things to handle scientific things, clean things. I want to handle the theory of everything. I want to deal with things like beauty, things like justice, things like relationships, things like significance, because we as humans value them. Do you know how Victoria's Secret sells their clothes? They don't use scientific data charts. They just have beautiful naked women. We love beautiful things. We want to look at them and we want to be them. That's who we are as human beings. We value relationships. Why do we go to football games where we see the players as a speck when we can sit at home, watch it on the big screen? Because we value community. We want to be there, scream with the rest of us who love our sports teams. We go to concerts for this experience. We want relationships. We want significance. Oprah, Deepak Chopra, why are these guys famous? What real value have they done? Because we value the notion of significance, something bigger than us, music, mysticism. We feel like there's something more than just the stuff. We value justice. When you watch the movie 12 Years a Slave, when you watch the movie The Matrix, when you watch Godfather, there's something that burns in you. You need to say, oh man, there's injustice here. Set things right. Neo, go and rescue Morpheus. We want payback. That's what our hearts burn for. Julian Barnes, superstar writer, English writer, says this. He says, I don't believe in God, but I miss him. He's pointing to something. There's more than just the measurable. There's something else. There's an echo floating in the back of us. It's like our stomachs are hungry for food that our brain is convinced doesn't exist. There's something going on. Now, science does not have a monopoly on reason or logic or truth. Atheism, Gnosticism, theism, all of these things, I claim, are religious claims. They're truth claims. To say that there's not enough evidence for a God, but at the same time to say that humans are important and moral and rational, it is an incredible statement of faith. It is a faith statement. It is a religious statement. Each of us is a religious person. Everyone in this room is a person of faith. Here's what David Foster Wallace writes. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. You see, we're putting our chips in some bucket. We're betting on some horse. And you choosing not to bet is also a bet on the non-existent horse. We're all betting. There is no neutral ground. We all base our life on some bag of beliefs. Now, there are 2 kinds of beliefs that this can happen. One, imagine you're in a shopping cart. You can buy pre-existing beliefs on the shelf. They're like, the Christian belief, right? It comes with who God is like, what he's done in history, the claims of reality, what morality should look like. It's like a whole package belief you can buy. Pre-packaged, historical, theoretical, the way it plays with science. Put it in your cart. You can buy a Buddhist belief. You can be a Muslim, buy a Muslim belief. Or you can have the American buffet, right? You could just pick whatever belief things you like about different things. There's not enough belief in God. I'll throw that in. Here's my view on purpose of existence. I'll throw that in there. A view on love, a view on devotion, a view on honor, thoughts about aging. You just make your own belief system, but the point is we're all living our lives based on something that makes us tick and push forward. We cannot say not enough evidence for God and say my bag is full. Let's compare the no evidence for God to the cold Christian belief. Your cart's not full yet, my friend. You have to compare a full set of beliefs to another full set of beliefs. And when you do that, you ask the question, which gives us evidence and confidence to live life well? Which full set of beliefs, the way we're living life, seems to be the right way to do it? To me, no bag of beliefs is as complete and as satisfying as the Christian worldview. Let me be clear. I don't believe in the Christian faith because it gives me meaning, because it's emotionally satisfying. My friends, I'm a mathematician. I have no emotions to satisfy. The reason I believe in physics and the existence of forces and particles that I cannot see is not because physics makes me happy and satisfies my life. It's because it best explains the physical world. And the reason I believe in the Christian story, that the world is beautiful, but at the same time broken. And it is due to our separation from God, and God has pursued us to bring us back to him. This story, I believe in it because it is the best bag of beliefs to me that explains our deep questions, our mess, and our hunger. So let me close by just sharing why I find this so compelling. A couple of reasons. First, the Christian faith is not a story of morals or theories or philosophies, but it is grounded in the mess of history. It is historical claims, making incredible claims, culminating in a resurrection of a dead man named Jesus. You can't use science to bear and measure it, but you can use historical and literary tools to try to study it. Second, unlike any faith system I know, that the Christian one is the only one that values the physical and the spiritual. It values both of them, not just a Gnostic thought of who God is in a moral setting, or not just the stuff of the earth, but both of them together. The resurrection of Jesus shows that flesh and blood matter. Jesus did not resurrect into a spiritual sense and float off into the sky and says, come join me. He resurrected and said, can I have some fish to eat? Sex matters. Ice cream matters. Our earth matter. It is a physical, tangible thing. It is not about doing good deeds to go to some disembodied heaven to sing songs to a magical God, but it is a beautiful physical world that one day will be set right. It's also a story that deals seriously with questions of mess and justice. At the messy death of the cross, love and wrath meet. You see, when my little girl, Essie, the little one that you saw, if something happens to her, the girl I adore, there will be wrath in my heart. You see, love and wrath aren't opposite of one another. The opposite of love is not wrath. They're meant to go together. The opposite of love is indifference, when I don't care what happens to the little girl. And at the cross, God is not indifferent. In fact, he does something incredibly remarkable. He shares in our responsibility for our mess. And the Bible is this beautiful piece of literature that demonstrates it. And finally, as with any theoretical model, I have tested it in my own life. You test models to see if it works. I put it in practice, and I can say I've walked with God. It frees me from brokenness. I see more peace and forgiveness in my life because of this model, and a wisdom to live life well. So let me just close by saying thank you to coming. Thank you to my dialogue partner who's going to take these things seriously, who values these kind of questions, these big questions. And I just want to close with one of my favorite quotes from my favorite book, The Princess Bride. It says, life is pain. Anyone that says different is selling something. To come here and to drink one of our thoughts, one of our belief systems, and say, that was an easy drink, is a problem. It is painful to wrestle with these things. It is costly to wrestle with these things, but I encourage you guys to do so. Thank you for your time.
I was just going to do it from the chair, but I think I'll go over and use the podium for a second just so that I can set the tablet down. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I never know whether we're going to get like a packed house or 20 people. You know, a lot of it depends on whether there's a game on the night that we're doing things like this. Gabe reached out to me and asked me if I'd do this, and I've had to work to be eager to say yes to pastors, because it doesn't always go as planned, but this has gone exceptionally well so far. I'm looking forward, and anybody who wants to can contrast tonight's events with the debate that I did on Sunday. I'm a former Southern Baptist, although occasionally I went to Pentecostal churches because they had better concerts. I say that I'm a Southern Baptist so that all of you who are trying to stuff me in a box and ease your consciences can readily go to, oh, he had the wrong religion, which is what they all think, and it makes me wonder if there's a right one. And so far, I haven't found any. I was a believer for more than 25 years. Everybody thought I was supposed to be a pastor. I was terrified of public speaking, which is incredibly ironic now. And it turns out public speaking is easy if you're not trying to BS anybody and you just talk about what you know and you're willing to say you don't know. Nothing to it. I set out after I was convinced that God took my job away, because I hadn't become a preacher, to find a way to do what God wanted me to do, to fulfill my obligation under 1 Peter 3:15, to be able to win hearts and souls to God if that's what he wanted. My roommate at the time was an atheist. I set out to find a way to convince him, and through this process, without ever having a conversation with him, I realized that despite walking down the aisle at the age of 5 and rededicating my life several different times as a teenager, I didn't have a good justification for my beliefs, and as I explored it further, I found that I could not find one. I went to an uncle of mine who's a former medical missionary and was the spiritually wise person in the family. He gave me an argument that I thought was, oh my gosh, because he said, hey, ask the atheists where they get their morals from. And I was like, that's brilliant. Without a God, they can't have a moral foundation. And, oh my gosh, this is going to do it. And then I studied a little more and realized, no, that's not a good question. It's really actually a bad question. And I spent a number of years giving lectures about the superiority of secular morality from my standpoint. I'm largely in agreement with Sam Harris, and I do think that it's possible that not science like in the sense of putting it in a beaker, but the scientific process of investigating the facts about reality can lead us to a better understanding of morality. The problem here is about where you put the burden of proof on claims. So if somebody says there is a God, this is a fact-based claim, and then I have to ask, okay, does this God interact in reality in any way that we can detect? And you'll get different answers from different people. There are deistic notions and vague theistic notions that say, yes, there's a God, but he doesn't interact in reality in any detectable way. Then how did you detect this God? You have detected the undetectable. You are a miracle of modern science, and we need to hook you up so that we can start detecting all the other things that are undetectable. And then there are people who say that, yes, there is a God, he's real, and he interacts in your life. Cool. By that definition, you now have something that we can test for. We may not be able to draw a proper causal link because so far science is blocked from confirming the existence of the supernatural or verifying any causal link to the supernatural. I mean, that's just the fact of science, which I'm pretty sure you would agree with, which is why we tend to say there's not scientific evidence for God, but instead the question, is there evidence for God? When it was first posed to me, I told Gabe, I said, well, the answer is yes. Because by the strictest definition of evidence, if somebody tells you the story about how God changed their life, you now have anecdotal evidence for God. So what we're really asking is there sufficient good evidence to warrant belief in the claim that a God exists? And we can't use science for this. Whether a God actually interacts in reality or not, we can't confirm the connection. The quote that you had up from Michio Kaku, he actually stole that from Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke famously said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Michio Kaku changed it to divinity, and I don't know, maybe it's more recent. But that's the thing. People used to ask me, what would it take to change your mind? What would it take to convince you that a God exists? And I gave the same glib answers that many of my atheist cohorts do about messages in the sky written in so that no matter what language someone spoke, it was always in their language, and I am the Lord God and all this. I'll get to what would change my mind before I'm done. But we have the scientific limits. But he also mentioned we have to use historical methods to investigate what happened in the past. And those aren't repeatable. It's not like we have a time machine. Maybe we'll figure it out if we have a time machine. I'm not convinced that's a possibility either. The problem with historical methods is this. We know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. We know the Gospels all disagree. I just did a debate on the resurrection, so I'm not going to beat that up too much. We know the Gospel accounts don't agree. How do we reconcile that? We know eyewitness testimony is flawed. There are people you can go interview right now who will tell you their alien abduction story. We tend to not believe them. Some people do, which is how the History Channel stays on the air. But by and large, we tend not to believe them. It's not enough evidence. Even though their stories are compelling and they tell the same stories and people in different locations identify what they experienced and it seems the same, and it's because we recognize that these ideas already existed in culture and affected the narrative. So when we look back in history, if we don't have a time machine, what do we do? Now, in 2 weeks, I'm moderating a debate between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price on whether or not Jesus actually existed as a historical figure. Bart Ehrman is an agnostic-y, atheist-y. He's not a theist. He doesn't believe in Jesus, but he's a New Testament scholar. He's written a lot of books. Everybody's probably heard of him. If not, you should. He believes that Jesus existed, and it's potentially absurd to question this. Robert Price, on the other hand, is also a New Testament scholar who probably attends church more than any atheist I've ever met in my life, and is convinced that Jesus is a myth, and it's a fiction. Mythicists fall into a bunch of different categories. Some of them are really bizarre conspiracy theorists who think Christianity was invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons, and it never occurred to them that how did you get a Pope in the 4th century? But there are others who look at this, and what they're really saying is the historical method by default says that if someone is talked about as if they were a real person, we just assume they are. We're going to give people this, benefit of the doubt. You talk about somebody like they're real, they were real. Because we can't go back and confirm it. We're not going to, even if we found a tomb, we have DNA to compare it to. So you could never prove. I asked a guy once what would change his mind about Christianity. He's like, finding Jesus' body in a tomb. And I'm like, okay, you think you've come up with a situation that's now falsifiable, but it's not, because you have no way to verify what that body is. So what the mythicists are saying is, hang on a second, before we just by default say that somebody existed, let's see if we can come up with a way to figure out if there's enough evidence to presume this. And I don't have an answer on this topic. I may not even have it after moderating the debate in 2 weeks. But the problem is this: historical methods can never confirm a miracle. And to borrow from Bart Ehrman, a miracle is by definition the least probable explanation. So there's no way historians can look at the facts of reality and say the best explanation for those facts is the least probable explanation. What they can do is say, we can't come up with any other, although I would say that this is an argument from ignorance fallacy. But why you believe and what is enough to convince you is different from what may be enough to convince somebody else. So we're blocked with respect to science and history. We may even be blocked when it comes to philosophy. What would change my mind? I get asked this all the time. I don't know. But if there is a God, that God should know, by most standard definitions of God, should know exactly what it would take to change my mind and should be capable of changing my mind. And the fact that this has not happened means either that God does not exist or it doesn't yet want me to know that it exists. Either way, it's not my problem. It's God's problem. Science supposedly can't answer questions about beauty and morality and things like this. I wholeheartedly reject that. I think that we can. One of the things is you merge it with philosophy and you use science to get to the data points that tell you more about what it means to be a human. There are people who are concerned that, oh my gosh, this flower is beautiful, and I think God made it. And if I were to find out that it just evolved by some natural process, it would lose its beauty. Why? If there was a God, God could make a flower that was so beautiful that you would go into an orgasmic, sensationary overload just looking at it, rather than just, oh, that's a pretty flower, and that's a not so pretty flower. There's a concern that science, in its reductive processes, is going to reduce things down to, oh, love is just chemicals in the brain, which it is. That we now understand why this flower formed with these particular colors, and the bees see different colors than we do, and the hummingbirds. And then we learn more and more about the human brain, and we get to the point where we recognize, oh, we've just evolved to appreciate this for these reasons here. Did that in any way diminish the fact that when I look at that flower, it's beautiful? Not at all. This is a fear that has been spread around, that if we do away with God, everything is permissible. No, it's not. Well, God's the one that cares about human beings. No, human beings by definition are going to care about human beings. I don't need anybody nobody needed anybody to really tell them, hey, it's probably a good idea if you don't kill each other. Yet it was important enough to make a commandment out of it while simultaneously ordering people to kill each other. Secular humanism is a worldview that seeks to discover and use the best methods to encourage human flourishing. We don't need to appeal to the supernatural. By definition, we cannot, because we don't have access to the supernatural. But we know enough about human interactions and societies. We have thousands upon thousands of years of human civilizations trial and error alone could have got us to some pretty good answers. And then when we start to learn what it's like to be a human being, that maybe some of the expectations that have been given to us by methods that consistently produce the wrong answers, maybe those expectations are also wrong. Maybe what we need to do is continue to explore and say, you know what? I don't know what the answer to this question is, because as soon as you pretend that you know, you stop the pursuit and investigation for truth. As soon as you pretend, hey, we don't have any explanation for what was before the Big Bang, or even if the sentence before the Big Bang makes any sense, but I believe it was God. Cool. If you believe you have the answer, if you sincerely believe you have the answer, how much time are you going to spend looking for the right answer? If you think you've already got it, you're done. So much better is to say, I don't know, let's keep looking. And the time to believe something is after it has been established, after there is good reason for it. And that includes the God claims. I will believe in a God the instant that there's sufficient reasonable evidence for that God. Doesn't mean I'll worship him, by the way. There's a free will argument that some people use that God doesn't reveal himself to you because then you wouldn't have the choice. Well, for those people who believe that and also believe in Satan, I think they have a self-defeating position because there's somebody who definitely knows that God existed and chose to rebel. But I can believe that something is true and still have a separate opinion of its moral value, of whether or not it's deserving of respect. I could believe that Satan is true, not worshiping him either. And I have to say that because there are so many people who think that atheists are Satan worshipers. It's weird. For years, the message from some pulpits, not all, and I'm not going to disparage your church. Gabe and I got along great. There's a lot of ideas that we share, and I'm encouraged by that. But I grew up a Southern Baptist, and I've listened to, John Hagee, who tells atheists to get out of the country, and a bunch of other pastors who are anti-women, anti-atheist, anti-everything except, well, I'm not going to get into the political aspects of this, but they have a view of Christianity that is different. And so I've said before, if you want to know what's wrong with the First Baptist Church, you can go to the Second Baptist Church. But the truth is, all you have to do is go to the second pew in the First Baptist Church, and they'll tell you what's wrong with the first pew. That is not an attack. The reason everybody's laughing is because at some level we know that happens. By the way, happens in the atheist community too. So we're not on any sort of higher thing. And the reason it happens in both is because we're all human beings. Because we share common interests, because we care about our lives and the lives around us. My belief bag probably isn't full, but the places where I don't have a belief on a specific subject, those places are empty because the potential explanations have not met their burden of proof. Atheism is not, there are no gods, I'm convinced there are no. I am unconvinced that a God exists. There are definitions of gods that I'm convinced are absolutely false. They're self-contradictory, they violate logic. But we're stuck in this world. And all secular humanism is saying is we appear to have no access to the divine, so we don't get to reference that, for the same reason that courtrooms do not allow spectral evidence anymore. Because you get somebody on the stand who says, I saw Lucy courting with the devil, and somebody else says, no, it was you, and you can't put the devil on the stand, and I don't see that you can put God on the stand. If he wants to, that's great. I mean, if there's a God who could show up right now, convince me, convince all of us, anybody who's not convinced, I know there's a bunch of godless heathens that snuck in here tonight. Thanks. I don't believe because there's not enough evidence. But if there were, that might not make me an adherent to any particular religion or model. Because in the scenario, I spend a great deal of time studying various versions of Christianity and studying the Bible. And I understand when people call it a beautiful book. I understand that there is an aspect of literature and how it's affected culture that you can draw beauty from. I've talked before about the good things in the Bible. I run a resource called ironchariots.org, which is a counter-apologetics wiki. And I've gone verse by verse through the Sermon on the Mount, in part because I got tired of listening to atheists who probably hadn't read the Sermon on the Mount, say, oh yeah, well, there's some bad stuff in the Bible, but that Sermon on the Mount, I'm with you, that represents a good chunk of, some really good wisdom from the time. No, it doesn't. There's good stuff in the Sermon on the Mount. There's bad stuff. There's scientifically incorrect things like salt losing its flavor. Oh, well, that's not meant to be literal. Then why say it? If you're the God of the universe and you're the most morally perfect being and you're opposed to slavery, how could you ever inspire a book that explicitly allows people to enslave other people, to own them as property, to pass it on to their children? Have a separate set of rules for Jewish slaves than for non-Jewish slaves, to instruct people to buy their slaves from the heathens around them. But set slavery aside. What about the idea of original sin, or the fact that you are now subject to the sin of what somebody else did, inherited sin? What about the idea of substitutionary atonement, that we need to slaughter animals in the Old Testament to make up for our failings? What do those animals do? Right up to the sacrifice of Jesus himself. If I owe you $20, it doesn't do any good for somebody else to forgive me that debt that needs to be paid. The very idea of substitutionary atonement is morally repugnant. The idea of infinite torment or torture or punishment for finite crimes is objectionable. I look at the Bible and view this is some of the best wisdom from Bronze Age people. This is how they looked at the world and tried to come up with answers. This is how, when you don't have instant access to everything, you have to deal with your culture, and not everybody's going to have an understanding of why they should be a decent human being because they actually benefit from it. My actions affect you, your actions affect me, and if I get together with other people to encourage all of us to live a better life, we all benefit from it. Not everybody's going to get that, so it's much easier to say, thou shalt not kill. It's much easier to say, you need to do this because God says so. That doesn't teach us anything. When we were kids, nobody liked hearing, do it because I said so. We know that's a cop-out. It's not a satisfying answer. It's not an edifying answer. It doesn't give us any new knowledge. It doesn't teach us how to solve the problems. The debate that I did on Sunday, the final question, which didn't get aired because we talked about a bunch of other things, I asked him, what's Christianity's position on cloning? And he looked at me and said, that's a good question. Yeah. And it's a question that's coming up in our future. And so we need to have methods that can address the problems that are coming rather than continuing to argue and disagree about old methods that haven't necessarily worked very well. Reading a book like Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature shows that we are in fact living in the best of all possible times, and religion is on decline. The Journal of Religious Studies shows that societal health is negatively correlated with religiosity. And the answers from the religious are, well, those people had the wrong religion. If they only had the right one. I agree. How do we find the right one? Until somebody figures out a way to demonstrate that we found the right one, then it's all just opinion, and I'd rather keep my belief bag with a space open for something that's based on evidence and reason and empathy than just appeals to the supernatural. Thanks.
We would have all been. It's like the one guy who gets on the subway and then everyone else leaves, and we're sitting there side by side.
It's just tea, man.
No, I realize both you yahoos are wearing jackets, making me look like schlub up here. Thanks a lot.
We planned it.
Y'all are looking good, dapper. Hey, I got to tell you, your wife, I don't know if you realize you said this, but you were trying to say the best life possible, and you said the Beth, and his wife's name is Beth. So tell her you were thinking about her in the middle of the debate, and you conflated her name with best.
Yeah, it's actually probably because I'm diabetic and I'm off my meds right now while you make a change and my mouth's dry.
No, I'm telling you.
Sounds like
no.
Beth.
This is a
play
home
this
run.
Card.
Yeah, play this card.
card.
So I confuse you with best.
I'll call her now.
Yeah. So guys, that's the first part of what we're doing tonight. This is not exhaustive. This is what these guys are noodling on. It's some of their best work. It's some of their thoughts. And so I was hoping to have a little time here where I kind of maybe follow up on some of the things we heard, and then allow you guys as well a chance to say, hey, I heard this. It made me think of this. And so kind of as a jumping off point. But one thing that I heard bubble up, and I think there was a decent amount of back and forth on it. So Sethan, I think some of the stuff you were drawing from, I've read a version of it, N.T. Wright wrote a book called Simply Christian, and he says there's something latent within every human soul, and he calls them echoes of a voice, these things that are kind of sparks of the divine. And even if you're not a Christian or the right religion, it's kind of a spark of the divine in you. So he says, anytime you have that feeling, it's around justice, around relationships, around beauty, and around spirituality. And that's 4 things that crop up where you go, this, and you mentioned this to a sense, like when you feel that cathartic moment in a movie, you go, that's more than just, hey, the good guys won. There's something deeper there. When you see a beautiful flower, when your wife walks down the aisle, some of those things like, this is not just a pretty thing. There's something divine in this moment. So you spoke to that a little bit in the sense of science can't quantify these things. Matt kind of had a rebuttal of saying we can quantify them, and that does not diminish their, well, you can explain the evolutionary thing that got us from A to B. That does not diminish its beauty.
It's one thing to say science can't do this, and it's another thing to say science cannot do this now.
Yeah.
Or that science doesn't have access to it. I think when you talk about something that a latent aspect of the soul, I think you've kind of put the cart before the horse. What reason is there to think that there's a soul in the first place? And this feeling that I have of justice, I can justify. I can give a reason for it. A lot of it comes down to, like I said at the end, empathy. But I don't necessarily think you have to have anything like altruism or even a strong empathy to recognize that if we're sharing space and we're part of a community, it's in my best interest to make sure that not only you don't kill me, but that nobody kills you as well because we're cooperating. We know from game theory that cooperation is beneficial. And that may not be as appealing to people who want to put a sense of the divine on it, but I not only don't think it's any less significant, I think it's the only truth that we can point to. I mean, you could call that divine, but I don't know what the justification is for saying it's divine.
Yeah, I guess even when we talk about things like history or these kind of echoes, nothing is a slam dunk argument, right? Like as you're saying, there's nothing historical that you can prove. Yeah. Like there's no slam dunk argument that Abraham Lincoln got shot. What is the proof? I mean, there's like fuzzy evidence that we've collected, and we as a collective, there's like the newspaper clippings are there, and this is there, and it's like, yeah, probably got shot, it's probably Wilkes Booth, or he could have just been teleported. I mean, who knows, right? But over the course of time, there's enough consequences for us to say, you know what, if I add up all those pieces, I'm gonna bet that that's the truth, right? You gotta pick some choice over time, so you're gonna pick that's the truth. So what I think of it as, like, clearly, beauty alone or justice alone or all these things is not alone a pointer to God. It's not a slam dunk. But if you put it all together, to me, it starts pointing to it. So I don't think, first of all, there's a soul and it needs to be satisfied by justice and beauty. But these things are there, so I'm probably thinking, hey, maybe a soul is part of the game.
And I think, kind of echoing off that, I'm one of a handful of atheists who's repeatedly pointed out, I don't think there's any path to absolute certainty at all, everywhere, right. Anywhere but anything. And so a lot of times faith gets mentioned when what you really mean is how do we have a warranted belief in the face of uncertainty? Mm-hmm. We can't be sure, so we need to make the best guess. Mm-hmm. When you talk about Lincoln getting shot, Hume famously tells us to apportion our belief to the evidence. And the evidence is so overwhelming for that. I mean, yes. Nothing about our history makes sense without it. You have reports from people who were pro-Lincoln and anti-Lincoln. There's enough evidence to where you can say, yep, pretty doggone sure this actually happened. That's right. Nothing like that exists for the supernatural. And in lieu of the debate that's coming up in 2 weeks, I'll report back as to whether or not anything like that exists for Jesus. The problem with going back 2,000 years and having scattered reports and, no, it reminds me, so like the Egyptians apparently missed the global flood. And that's caused some modern Christians to say, okay, it wasn't actually a global flood, it was a regional flood, which doesn't give an explanation for the theological reasons behind it. If you need to wipe out a sinful world and you only flood out. So there's some problems there. But when you get to, is there enough reason to think it happened? I don't think, I agree with you. I cannot be certain that Lincoln was shot. Mm-hmm. But I'm far more confident in that than I am in anything having to do with the supernatural until somebody shows a way that we can investigate it. Yeah.
So on that same line of thinking, so Lincoln's 150 years ago, what are you comfortable with, Matt, for let's say a close contemporary, Augustus Caesar or Julius Caesar, what's the matrix of somebody who is time-wise? What makes you have certain beliefs about them or trust in the history of what you read? And what is missing when you apply that matrix to Jesus?
Yeah, so one of the I've talked about this a little bit. There's a video out there, so I'll just nutshell it. I think what happens in the brain, a couple different things. The first time you hear something that's really strange and not part of your current worldview, it's just like, that's weird, ignore. And then the second time it's, hey, I think I've heard something like that before. And then the third time is when you get to the pattern. For anybody who is old enough and fought in wars 3 on a match is bad luck. The first guy lights his cigarette, and the sniper goes, is there something over there? And the second one lights his cigarette and he goes, yep, there it is. And then the third one's the one that gets shot. When I look back in history, I don't put strong confidence in specifics, like somebody said this. Instead, I say, given the reports that are coming that were propaganda for this person and against, and they're both reporting that the individual said something like that, I think I can have a reasonable confidence that something like that was said. But I don't care who said it. The words stand and fall on their own. So it doesn't, Socrates said this. I don't care if Socrates said it. Is it true or not? Is the substance that's being discussed actually true? And so pointing back in time to say, okay, these people who wrote the Bible, they said these things. Cool. I believe somebody wrote this. My primary concern is what they said true, is what they said in some cases about morality. Is it actually beneficial for human beings? So I don't, if you want to tell me, hey, there's a good chance that Caesar didn't exist or that, Plato or Socrates didn't exist. Okay, it doesn't bother me because when I'm assessing whether or not something's true, the heuristic in my mind goes something like, here's the claim. Do I already believe it? Because that's a good question to ask because I might already believe the claim when I first hear it. Then it's, do I believe things that are similar? How much of my worldview would have to change if this is here? Is there sufficient evidence to get over that hurdle? And for the people who are, and there's a lot more to this that I covered in the video, for the people who are like, oh my gosh, that seems like a massive amount of structure and evidence that you'd have to get over. It's not. I've changed my mind on many things. I've changed my mind on God. Who knows? I might change back, but I've changed my mind on many things because what I'm trying to do is remove my bias and my preferences as much as possible. It's not possible. But that's the goal, and that's why when it comes to ethics, I like ideas like the veil of ignorance, which I'll explain later if we get to it.
Can I say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Whatever you want. I talked for a long time.
No, I was just going to comment on the historicity that we're talking about, and I do disagree that it does matter who says it, right? And it does matter what actually happened rather than just the morality consequences. If Abraham Lincoln did not get shot, that's important, right? The consequences of those things, of just the writing to being true is important. So, just a few things about history that you pointed out that I thought was interesting. One, you said you were talking about the gospel accounts all not agreeing on the resurrection. It's like, I personally, that's one of the biggest wins for me. Only 2 of the 4 gospels talk about the birth of Jesus. It's like Christmas, great, whatever, move on. The other 2 guys, let's get to 30, right? He's 30 now. But all 4, the resurrection is the linchpin. It's the point of turning that God, what he says is going to happen, happens. And the fact they don't all fully get it is really interesting. Why wouldn't you sort of think that one through if that is the point of the whole faith? And to me, it feels like such a raw thing that just happened. They're just trying to get ideas down rather than nailing it to perfection. So to me, that was interesting. And then if I just say one thing about just the resurrection that I found really cool is, the place that people started believing that Jesus is God, if it happened in India, who cares? If it happens in Egypt, if it happens in Rome, Rome has like a BYOG, bring your own God to the party, right? Everybody has a God. But Israel is the most monotheistic nation in the history of the universe, and it is surrounded by the most polytheistic nations all the time. And in the monotheistic nation, for a Jewish person to say, oh, by the way, this man is God, that's unbelievable. To me, it literally is unbelievable. And there are lots, and I'm sure you can agree to this, Matt, that there are lots of messiahs, right? Jesus was not the Messiah. There are lots of messiahs that happen all the time. And here's what happens to all the messiahs. The messiah is a political claim. To say messiah, you have to do 3 things. You have to make the temple clean again so you can have a relationship with God. You have to bring peace to the people, and you have to kill the enemies. That's a political claim of destroying Rome. And all the messiahs who came all got killed by Rome. And Jesus, after he got killed, people said, oh, by the way, he was Messiah. And people are looking around going, really? Because the temple's still dirty. Rome's still here. Are you nuts? What are you smoking? And for them to hold on to the fact that he's Messiah after he is dead and Rome is still there, I find that extremely weird. It might be cool for us, but 2,000 years ago, that is a weird thing to say, to claim somebody was Messiah when he didn't do any of the three things a Messiah is supposed to do in the Jewish faith.
Some of your students do that after a test, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Although I think there's an implicit admission there that if he didn't do the three things you have to do to be this Messiah, then clearly he wasn't. But my view of it is that, so the truth of a claim is independent of who's saying it. And the number of people who believe it or how strongly they believe it or in the face of what, obstacles they believe, isn't sufficient. I mean, they're not just the alien abduction thing, but you can go find, various godmen in India who supposedly have powers, and they have disciples who will follow them around, and they're all convinced. When we were at the ACSJ last night, there was a guy who had been in a cult for a number of years, absolutely convinced that this person is giving him spiritual experiences and has a path to this. So the fact that people believe it isn't enough. And on there, I would just go back to the Bible of let God be true and every man a liar. And so I'm waiting for God. There's a meme that got passed around that was mine, and I wanted, if anybody had seen it, it says, until a God gives me 5 minutes of their time, he deserves none of mine. And it's a little glib. I don't mean it in that sense. I'm just talking about how I'm not saying that the only way I could believe is for God to come down and, one-on-one. But what I'm saying is, if a Damascus Road experience is good enough for Saul, then why isn't it good enough for the rest of us? Why do I have to become, an expert in 20 different fields and study ancient languages and archaeology and cosmology in order to have some justification for a God that, when I believed, was as evident as the trees? There are people who call into the show and say, oh, you want proof of God? Just look at the trees. And atheists laugh at them. I don't. Because there was a time when look at the trees was profound and clear. And yet now I look at the trees and I don't see that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think an interesting point that both of you brought up, and Matt's done extensive work, believe me, don't get in a Bible tussle with this guy. He knows the Bible. But I think an interesting point that emerges, as Sethan was saying, there's discrepancies. If you've read the Bible, you know there's discrepancies. So the point that you're highlighting is our antennas go up when we hear 4 different government agencies issue the same statement. This is what happened. Don't ask any questions. You go, that's weird. We all agree on that exactly, and it happened exactly like that. You go, right? So you go, that's conspiracy, and you're pushing something down our throat. So to have a messy gospel account where did John miss the Passion Week by a day, and his timing's off, and the lineage in this one and this one are different? You've made a good kind of career out of picking those apart, and it's an aha moment for a lot of people because he knows the Bible really well, and he goes, this do not line up, and people go, oh, and the whole house crumbles. Is there any value in this idea of a messy? So it's
yes.
Okay.
I did. So as soon as, and I almost mentioned this, as soon as somebody says something like, the disagreement is actually increases the likelihood that it's true. There are people who mock that right away. I think that's true to an extent, that's right. But I think that the disagreements are significant and sufficient. And we're also have to remember we're talking about 2 different things. If we had 4 different accounts of Washington and the cherry tree, the fact that they might have disagreed on subtle details but got the essence right leads you to think, okay, there's probably something there. Yeah. However, we're not talking about human beings necessarily. We're talking about God inspiring a message that is the single most important message to humankind. Yes. I watched a debate recently, which I'll just hit briefly. Matt Slick, the guy who debated last Sunday, debated Jesse Morrell. They are both Christians. One's a Reformed Calvinist, one is not. And the debate was on whether salvation is through election, where God chooses you, or free will, where you choose God. And they were both able to go verse, and a plain reading of each one of every verse they presented. I'm like, yep, you're right. That completely supports your position. And the same's for the other guy. He's timing this.
Hey.
Right. Oh, for the whole thing. I thought you were like carding me.
Just for this section.
I'm sorry. I'll speak quicker.
Yeah.
But for me, what it showed is that on the single most important question, here are two people who are both Christians who doubt the other's salvation and doubt the pathway to salvation. And if there is a God, has some duty at a minimum to make sure that this one thing has to be clear. There are 1,000 denominations that identify as Christian, and they disagree on every single point of doctrine, including whether or not Jesus was fully divine, fully man, some mix, anything along those lines. Where is the clarity? And if, as the Bible says, God is not the author of confusion, then even though it ends up in a paradox, then God can't be the author of the Bible.
Let me zoom out to the bigger discussion. I found this, and I'm not a science guy at all. I love this idea, though. I wanted to hear we're talking about proof. We're talking about evidence, and I just saw this, and somebody can correct it who's a cosmologist in here or space person. But on the NASA website, they said this about black holes. Scientists can't directly observe black holes with telescopes that detect X-rays, light, or other forms of electromagnetic radiation. We can, however, infer the presence of black holes and study them by detecting their effect on matter nearby. I thought that was a really interesting thing, because I think what this God discussion ends up coming down to, as Satyan was saying, it's not a thing. There's no silver bullet, say, and I think you've said that as well. There's not, you asked, I was actually going to ask the question that sounds like you've been asked dozens of times. What is sufficient good proof? And we're not sure what that silver bullet is, but if it's an accretion of several things, you go, I see God affecting A, B, and C. I cannot see him. I cannot prove it's him, but the way my heart tugs around beauty, or the way I've seen him personally, even if it is anecdotal, personal, and non-provable, you go, I've felt that based also as well with what I've experienced in church or what I've seen good in people. What do you do with an argument like that? Where does that land with you?
So I like the black hole example. There are many things that we have inferred its existence from observing particular effects. The thing is, we didn't begin with an idea of a black hole and then work our way to it. I have no doubt that religious belief has an effect on the individuals and has an effect in their lives and has an effect on the world, irrespective of whether there's any truth as a foundation for that. So when we say, we can't see God directly, but we can see how God works, I would say that I can see how belief in God works, and I can see how believing certain things directs people's lives, but I don't see a justification for drawing a causal connection to, this is because of God. Even when we get down to things like, people who have been freed from addiction or cured of some disease. Well, we know cancer goes into remission. And a friend of mine's dad, famously said, I had a headache. I took an aspirin and said a prayer, and the headache went away. Which one do we give the credit to? And by the way, if you didn't take the aspirin and you said a prayer, that still doesn't demonstrate that the prayer is responsible, because headaches go away. So I'm not saying that you're wrong in seeing God or even inferring God. What I'm saying is I don't accept, and until you give some reason, I don't accept that you actually have good enough reason to reach the conclusion that you've had. To me, this type of argument is going to be true for almost any religion. And I hear this from people of other religions of saying, I know this is real because this happened. And as somebody who's been doing magic their entire life, and even in teaching people, I do a lecture on magic and skepticism, and teaching people how some of this works to help them avoid being fooled. One of the most dangerous things is to make somebody half smart, or in the wrestling terms, a smart mark. You know how this one thing's done, so when it's done another way, you assume you're smart enough to find that, and when you don't, now you're convinced that it's real. Well, I've seen the fake psychics do the cold reading, but this person didn't do any of that stuff and got right into my mind and told me what happened, so it had to be real. No, it doesn't. It might be real, but the time to believe it is after you've confirmed that it's real, and not just, to get the biases out of the way.
I think in many ways I'd agree that theoretically, if all I have are notions of feelings, right? Like, I do things and I feel, if God tells me to, or somebody says to act this way, I do it to my wife, and wow, she's kind to me, right? Maybe that's God telling me the truth, right? If that's the only set, then I think any notion of theistic thing seems good, right? Like the good truths of Islam and the good truths of Christian faiths and the good truths of the Buddhist all sound good. The thing that distinguishes those things is a very clear historical claims of the Christian faith. To me, that's why I hang on it. is because it claims very crazy things.
Let me do two more questions, one more for each of you guys, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for the rest of you. Satyan, I'll go to you now. Matt does a good job of demonstrating, one, there's 1,000 different denominations today. So prior to that, there's the early church, and then it kind of congeals into Catholicism, and for 1,500 years, they're in their heyday, Reformation happens, and now we have, some people say dozens of thousands, but I guess distinctive, 1,000 Christian denominations here. I've seen as much as 33,000. So you say, this is just within Christianity. So for that much change to have happened for 1,500 years, this is how faith works. Reformation, that's not how faith works. Now then here, as it's splintered into 1,000, 10,000 different denominations, to his point, where's the clarity from God, or why does that happen? How does that affect proof of God if you're kind of saying, where's the God in the midst of this confusion? If he will rightly just give me something, it doesn't have to be writing in the sky, but how do we end up with 5,000 or even 1,000 or even 200 versions of God that are ostensibly all within this Christian realm?
I think just a couple of things. One, I'm not convinced that those are all as different as we think they are.
Sure.
Right? So in other words, they might share many core beliefs of what is true, and they might, maybe there's a rock musician in one that grew up in a certain way. Maybe it's a Pentecostal way of preaching it versus a Presbyterian way of preaching it. So, and maybe you could distinguish that down a little bit. Right? But having said that, though, I think that the interesting thing about the Christian faith that I love is that God is willing to be messy with his people. Somehow, I don't buy the fact that once Jesus resurrected, that there is a unity and a holding hand and a dancing of joy and this clear, beautiful vision. People don't change. We're broken, and God is with us. In fact, he propels and moves the church, a broken church, as anybody can witness by reading any news article about the church, and is still with us during that time. So, in fact, one of the coolest things I find about Jesus' time on earth is that his number one criticism throughout his time is never against those outside of the loop. In fact, he hangs out with those outside of the loop, right? He's willing to hang out with those outside of the loop. His number one criticism is those who are in charge of the loop, who are in charge of the church, to say, you've led those people astray. I wonder what he would have to say to the leaders and to those people pushing this brokenness today. I really doubt it's for those outside of it. It's probably a judgment towards us who are not willing to bend our hearts to others.
Yeah, that's almost uniformly true in the Gospels. Most of his derision and anger is for the religious professionals, which doesn't bode well for me. But the rest of you...
I didn't want to point that out.
Yeah.
You talk about the arguing and dissension. It started right off the bat. Paul and Peter are arguing.
That's
you know?
right.
You don't have to read anything other than the Bible, which I encourage, by the way.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me do this last question for Matt, just because I think we have a shared affinity for this guy. Ricky Gervais, yay, nay? Big fan?
Yeah.
Okay. So Ricky Gervais, outstanding comedian, PG-13 R-rated, but still, great comedian. He views the world very well. He's got a very keen eye. He's also an atheist. But I read this great article by Ricky Gervais, and he says, why I'm a better Christian, he says, why I'm a great Christian. So everybody knows he's an atheist. But he goes through, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but he's walking through, and he's walking through the Ten Commandments and saying, I adhere to most of these. But even... very seriously, he goes out of his way to say, I find this Jesus guy's compelling. I don't do the half man, half God, or fully God thing. But he said he really tries to live his life patterned after this Jesus guy. And in some ways, I wonder if that's what Christianity really is. I think it's really interesting. Can a guy who proclaims to be an atheist but follows Jesus be a better Christian than a Christian? Anyway, side note. Does that have any appeal to you? Is there anything about the guy from Nazareth that you go, that's compelling? I've heard your point about the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes.
What's most compelling about the guy? If you withdraw the deity, maybe remove some of the layers of mythicism that you think are there, what's compelling about Jesus to you?
First, I need to tweet at Ricky. See if we can't have a discussion about this at some point.
Can I be there? I'd love to be.
Okay. We've never met in person, but he tweeted when he found the TV show and tweeted something nice about me, and since then we kind of had a little back and forth. But when I went through the Sermon on the Mount and I pointed out the good things and the bad things, and just the other night I was asked, what do I find most appealing about Christianity? It depends on, of course, which version of it, but in general, anything that seeks to better humanity I think the verse that I use is also from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the children of God. I'm in favor of anybody who's going to encourage peace. I just wish they would encourage it for the right reason, which is peace is good for its own sake. Peace is what resolves conflict. Peace is what makes sure that we can begin to cooperate, which we know is the right answer. If your motivation for being a peacemaker is just so that you'll be called a child of God, well, good for you. But I think there's a better reason. But there are lots of things like that, which is why I did the Sermon on the Mount, because a lot of atheists were like, oh yeah, this Jesus guy, he said stuff that's just amazeballs good. And I looked at it and said, yeah, maybe. But there's also things in there that aren't true. There are things in there that would like encourage victimhood sort of thing. But there are some really good things there. And this touches on something I've had a standard bet for years now, which is if you can show me something that is real and good and beneficial that can only be achieved through religious doctrines specifically tied to the truth of them, I'll buy you a steak dinner. Because I'm not convinced that religion is necessary to reach any good goal that is real. Obviously, if you consider heaven a good goal, okay, we have to talk about whether it's real. But there are plenty of things, even just in the Beatitudes, that I think are good to encourage. I like the idea of encourage forgiveness, not in a blanket sense that lets everybody get away with things, but that allows the person who has been wronged to get on with their life without carrying on that baggage. I'm irritated at the way religions have taught the world to view death. And I think one of the nice things, and I'll borrow from Penn Jillette a little bit, is that as far as I can tell, this is the one and only life I'm going to get. So it's in my best interest to live it as well as possible. That doesn't leave me to hedonism. Hedonism isn't necessarily good, but it does encourage me to make sure the relationships I have with people are as good as they can be, that if I've wronged somebody, I need to make amends, because I don't have an afterlife to then try and make up for it then. And if there is an afterlife, well then bonus, I lived a good life and something else happened. And if it turns out I lived a good life that benefited myself and the people around me, and there's a God who decides that I should still be tortured forever for that, then I am morally superior to that God, and I will be, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't keep a God from squashing me like a bug, but I will spend my eternity in the fires of hell, knowing that I was put there by a thug who didn't value good, truth, compassion, and empathy, and instead wanted somebody who followed whatever the model is for salvation, which we don't know. But
it's good stuff. All right, stuff is in your minds right now. So here's just one side note here, a couple things for questions. One, they really need to be questions. So if you have something really cool to say and you just kind of want to let it hang in the air, save that for your dog at home. But if you have a real question, we'd like for you to ask it. But here's what we're going to do. We don't want to stack up and it's all questions for Matt or it's all questions for Satyan. So I'd like to alternate, ideally, as they exist in the room, just so that we can continue to honor both sides of the discussion. So let me start here. Who's got a question for Sethan? I think you raised your hand first. There's a mic that will come to you. Rob. So raise your hand, and we'll start from there.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah, I have a question
let me know when it's
for
a
the
minute.
Christians.
I'll talk for an hour.
The Christians have both admitted that the Bible has inconsistencies and contradictions. It doesn't agree with itself in just so many different places. And it seems, what I can't understand is how a trained scientist can compartmentalize your life the way you are. When I look at my financial aspect, my financial life, or my professional life, or my life as a husband or whatever, I look in the same way. I have the same criteria. I look at the evidence. Can it be proven? Does it make sense? And so forth. Now, for you to believe the Bible the way you do, I'm asking you if it doesn't bother you.
That I've taken my brain out.
Yeah.
In order to drink this poison in.
Well, it's like, oh, you said it.
That's great. I just wanted to jump to the end,
thank
right?
you.
There.
No.
No, that's.
No.
I understand your question. So.
All right, it's a little bit more part to this too.
Okay.
So, the textbook that you give your students, the physics book, the chemistry book, the math book, would be consistent all the way through. And if you saw that this chapter didn't agree with just this chapter, and this chapter was written by somebody who's trying to prove their point,
Right.
And not be objective,
Right.
you would say, no, I'm not going to give them this text.
right,
But
that's
this is how the Bible was written.
Yeah, interesting.
So how can you be so convinced
Right. Of this
that
inconsistent
the
document.
Bible,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was written by people trying to convince Christians. It was written by Christians for Christians.
Let's let him answer.
Okay, let's get refreshments, everybody.
That's a great question. It's a great question. First of all, I think we have to sit down and figure out what I really believe about the Bible when you say I believe it. So, one of the things that Matt was talking about is it's not your words were it's not meant to be. If it's not meant to be literal, then why say it? And I think the Bible, many times when we read it today, we read it as 21st century scientists. You see, I think the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. So there's a book of poetry in there, in the middle of it. There's a book of Job, which is this railing against God by this man, and the whole book of Job is a poem, right? It's not a text. Genesis account, the beginning of the Genesis, it's not a scientific document about 7 literal days. You might say, well, why doesn't God just get to the point and tell us scientifically how he made it? Because it's not about science. It's not written to you. It's written for you. At different times during those eras, people value different things other than scientific notions. So I think there is a note. In fact, let's forget the Bible. Let's look at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Genesis 1 says God created the heavens and the earth, boom, 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 and then man was done on the day 6, and God sit back and said, this is sweet on day 7. Genesis 2 starts by saying God made everything for man, and then he made all this other stuff. Forget the rest of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2 is the greatest contradiction I've ever seen. The order in which God, I mean, if I was a scientific believing boy, I'd take that Bible and I'm done. But yet, why do I believe it? Because Genesis 1 tells you the order of how things were done, tells you that God is in charge, that this world is not a chaotic world the way the Babylonian myth thought about at that time period. But Genesis 2 told you the purpose of why it was done. That at the end, man was not an afterthought to God. It wasn't a last notion, according to the Babylonian myth, that God made man as slaves for him. He actually had man in the central vision of this whole creation. It was a beauty for it. If you read it as a scientific document, it's a deep contradiction. If you read it as the way it was meant to be read, it's gorgeous and beautiful. And it is a hard thing to do. This is one of those things Matt pointed out, that this is not an easy thing. You just can't have a guy reading it from day one and fully understanding it, because this is a historical document over thousands of years. It does take some maturity and some chew to fight through and eat the steak, but it's gorgeous to eat it.
Am I right that you don't think the Job story actually happened?
So to me, the point of the Job story, I don't know if it happened or not, I'll tell you.
Okay,
To me, the point of this Job story is not the end when God gives Job his family, because if you look at the very last thing, Job's family's all dead, and at the end, God's like, hey, you have some daughters, they're the most beautiful in the world. In fact, if you look at the very last paragraph, it's not a poem. The whole thing is a poem till the very end. It feels like somebody just tagged on. Oh, you know what? Let's give him some daughters.
Like they did with the ending of Mark.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
So
Hold on one second.
just for the record, go ahead.
1 second. We are recording the Q&A. We're recording the whole thing. So keep that in mind. Matt puts this stuff on his website. And so if anybody, there's Christians, and we're all over the spectrum in here, but I want you to know that in advance. So if you were kind of on the fence about asking something, that might make you swallow it, and you can come ask these guys at the end. So anyways, I just want you to know that in advance. We are filming in here. This isn't like Big Brother. There's not cameras everywhere, just here and there. But I just want you to know that. Sorry, back to you.
I just wanted to say, so there are a lot of atheists that will point out, Genesis 1 and 2 are contradiction. I'm in agreement with him that there's a theological understanding that makes those two not contradictory with each other. My reason for rejecting it is that the order of creation in Genesis 1 is still wrong. But separate issue.
So a question for Matt. Yeah, let's stick up front. Here we go.
Okay, this is a really simple question. I've been listening to you, Matt, and it seems like you're awfully open-minded for an atheist. And then maybe you're actually an agnostic. I mean, isn't there a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference. So I just did a video this week for my channel called "You're Not an Atheist, You're an Agnostic." That's the title of it, and I go through a description. In the same way that knowledge is a subset of belief, theism and atheism address what you believe, and Gnosticism addresses what you know. So they're not mutually exclusive. You could be an agnostic theist. You could be someone who believes in God but doesn't claim to know there's a God. There's another category of agnostic which claims that the the God proposition is unknowable, that you can't get to an answer on the question. And then there is this intellectually elite, snotty agnosticism that says, oh, you theists and you atheists, you're just alike, dogmatic in your thing. That's why I made it clear that, so the atheism gets broken down into weak atheism and strong atheism. Weak atheism is, I do not believe a God exists. And strong atheism is, I believe no God exists. In both cases, I probably fit both of them depending on subtleties and definitions of belief and knowledge. But yeah, under some definitions of agnostic atheist, I fit that. I really don't care, and this is how I kind of ended the video, I really don't care what label somebody else wants to put on it. The fact remains, they believe in a God. I don't. You want yet? I used to. I don't currently. I might again. That's the nature of living in a dynamic world. But you can call that whatever you want. I tend to call it an atheist, and so do most of the atheists that I interact with, because it's got a philosophical grounding, a history. But words are just tools that we use to communicate. They can change their usage anytime. Yeah. Maybe next month I'll be a Fergal-Burgle.
It's got a good ring to it.
Yeah.
Next question for Sethan.
It's actually for both of you.
Cheater.
What proof do you have that makes you believe in God? And what proof would you need to believe in God?
Did you just get here?
I'm in the back.
I mean, I'll say it in 20 seconds. I don't have any proof in a mathematical sense that there is a God and is the Christian God. But out of all the things that I've seen, it gives me incredible confidence. Like, there's no proof that when I go home tomorrow night and hang out with my wife that we're having ice cream, that she won't poison the ice cream. There's no proof that in fact, there's a good chance, actually, the ice cream might be poisoned. But there's a huge sense of confidence that I have that the ice cream that I'm going to have with her will be great because of 20 years of marriage has led to the fact that that's going to be another time we're going to have ice cream together. In the sense that there's no guarantee of anything in this world, I think Matt would agree. But to me, I'm betting. I'm putting my confidence in the fact that there's enough evidence for the things I talked about. And that's why I believe in that.
But I don't think I got an answer from you.
Well, I didn't want to condense what I just...
For Matt.
Oh, sorry.
But you said you would need proof. You would need proof. And so
Well, I tend to not use...
What would that look like?
I tend to not use the word proof because of its mathematical usage.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
What I said was, I don't know what it would take to convince me, but if there's a God, that God would know and hasn't done so. It's not my problem. So I think it would be arrogant to say, this is the sort of evidence that would prove a God. Because the quote from Michio Kaku and Arthur C. Clarke, I can't tell the difference between something happens, whether it comes from a God with powers that I don't understand and comprehend, or some alien technology, that I can't tell the difference. But there's a bigger problem than that, and that is neither of those scenarios ever happen. There's not, it's like, there's a website, Why Doesn't God Heal Amputees? It's not like we see limbs growing back. It's not like we can confirm miracle accounts. There's not even anything, I use an example of a courtroom to talk about, I'm not finding God innocent of existing, I'm finding God not guilty, because the prosecution hasn't made their case that he is guilty. But it's worse than that. I don't think there's sufficient evidence for the prosecutor to ever have brought a case in the first place. They can't produce the corpse, they can't produce the weapon, they can't produce anything other than there's a lot of people who believe this and who derive value from it, who don't seem to be able to demonstrate it in the way we would demonstrate anything else. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I think this should have extraordinary evidence, but I don't even think it meets the standards of ordinary evidence. It's anecdotal, it's testimonial, it's God's done a powerful work in my life, and that's cool. I believe you that something happened. What I don't believe is your claim that it was God that did it. You have to justify that, because it's no different than saying I won the game because of my lucky rabbit's foot. Maybe you did, maybe that rabbit's foot lucky, but you have to actually demonstrate that, and that hasn't happened, for me.
Forgive me if I missed it. You're talking about the existence of God without actually defining the term.
Yeah, any of them.
Could each of you define the God that you're talking about?
I don't do that. What I do is evaluate the claims. So I'm happy to talk about whatever God he presents and say, I either do or don't believe in that. Because, you know, if you say, I define God as this bottle of water, I believe that bottle of water exists. I think generally we tend to talk about the God of classical theism, which fits with Christianity and has the various omni characteristics of omnipotence and omniscience and omnibenevolence. Specifically tonight, because of where we are, I'm talking about my understanding of the Christian God from my background and from whatever I can glean from them. I'm not convinced that any God exists, but I don't get to define a true Christian, and it would be completely unfair of me to say, I'm going to define God as this and then argue that he doesn't exist. Instead, I let the believers tell me what it is they believe and why, and then address whether or not I think that's sufficient.
Yeah, to me, the notion of God is, I mean, if you just want a theistic notion of a God, I have no interest in that. An abstract notion of a God that created and doesn't hang out with us or some weird way. But my belief in a God is a very specific, particular one that's interesting. That's what I actually want to study and contradict or move on or actually pick and choose to follow. And that is an Orthodox Christian view of God. That is a package you can unwrap and take a while to unwrap it. That's my definition of what God is.
Go ahead. Yeah, find somewhere to build.
You know, sort of a question for both of you. If you require proof of God, that means you don't have any faith at all. That's just for you. Mm-hmm. And for the other one, just a question: is the X-rated Bible still in print?
So I'll go first. And just say that there is faith because, as I think Matt and I were talking about, there's no slam dunk. There is no slam dunk, right? So it's just, I am, at the end of the day, taking a leap of faith by eating the ice cream my wife gives me, right? I am taking a leap of faith by getting on the plane tomorrow and believing that the pilot knows what's going on. Those are leaps of faith because it's not 100% guaranteed. There's enough consequences and background to say, hey, it's worked so far in my life and all these other people are flying. So far my wife has been good to me by giving me ice cream that's not poisoned. And so those are the things I take a faith on. There's no slam dunks.
But all the Bible requires is faith, that's all.
Well,
It doesn't require any proof at all, just faith.
so that's debatable as well, which is how we ended up with all the. I have a particular definition of faith where you asked about the X-rated Bible. I don't think that I use faith in anything. Instead, I have varying confidence levels that I try to apportion to the evidence. And I think that faith is the excuse people give when they don't have a good reason, because if you give a good reason, you say, and I live in a world where I can't get to certainty. So belief in the face of uncertainty is every belief. And that would mean that every position is a faith position. And I don't want to equate the confidence that he has in his wife not poisoning ice cream with the claim that there's somebody who exists absent space and time and cares about who you sleep with, or whatever your view is. I don't know if the X-rated Bible's still in print. I think I have a copy that I got from American Atheist. It's the type of thing that doesn't really hold any interest for me now, although there's an R. Crumb animated Bible, or not animated, but cartoon version of the Bible.
No, it wasn't written by the American Atheist.
Yeah, I have that one. I'm saying there's also a book by R. Crumb, the cartoonist, who does a cartoon version of the Bible, which is definitely X-rated.
The Bible's X-rated.
Well, yeah, so one of the things is that people look at the Bible as the good book. And what I've continually said is, okay, would you let me read Bible stories of my choosing to your children? Nobody takes me up on it, and I'm glad because if they did take me up on it, I would not do it.
So let's do a couple more questions, and then here's the thing, guys. I think these guys might be willing to take a little bit of questions. They both have early morning flights tomorrow. I know you guys got to get up and do the rat race tomorrow. So let's do a couple more questions, and then maybe they'll stick around, but please give them the ability to leave when they need to so they can get home to their families tomorrow. So let's do a couple more. There's a question back there. Yeah, you got the mic.
Now, you had suggested that,
Hold it up.
Oh, sorry. You had suggested that faith in God was a hindrance to science, with the idea that, if I know why something, if I believe I know why something happened, then why look at it any further? But when I look at the history of science and the scientific discoveries, I see men who had tremendous faith in God and spent their life trying to figure out, how did God do it? And it drove them to look deeper and harder. How do you reconcile this idea that faith in God is going to be a hindrance to science with the history of scientists who have had strong faith in God and have also contributed greatly to our understanding of science.
Yeah, there's no denying that's been a long-standing tradition, and the reason we have universities and churches and all kinds of other things were because of people of faith. I think generally, though, what they were acting on behalf of wasn't religious doctrine, but human curiosity. Human curiosity about religious doctrine, and you can have that even if you don't believe the doctrine. All of the things that they went out to explore to find the answers to, even if they were saying, how did God do it, that is still, the true question is, how in fact did that occur? What is the actual explanation for this? The fact that they might credit to God or have been looking on behalf of God is secondary, because religions, most of them, have made factual claims about the nature of the universe. And the way they have been proven wrong on the occasions where they've been wrong is through science. It's not, and science, by the way, can get stuff wrong, and the way that science is proven wrong is through more science. Religion doesn't ever prove science wrong, and I think that's important.
Bob, in the back, you got something?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Typically, I think we look for evidence in two places, the book of nature and the book of Revelation, which you've been talking about as the Bible. The book of nature, the ones that I hear mentioned quite often are things like the Big Bang, what caused everything that we see, where did it come from? The fine-tuning, there are something like 20 constants that are precisely set so that conscious life can exist in the universe. And why is that? We talked about the moral argument tonight in terms of why is there absolute right and wrong objectively. But I'd like to hear about the second one, the fine-tuning. What do you guys think about that one? And these 20 constants that just happen to be precisely right for conscious life, is that perhaps an evidence of God?
You want to go first?
I'll go first. I'll be honest with you, that's not enough to convince me. I mean, I think it's almost like putting the cart before the horse sometimes. Like since I see all this other evidence for God historically and through other things, I look back and I go, wow, God did it this way. When I look at my theorems and the proofs that I come up with and I work with my students, I say, wow, that's kind of cool, God did that. But I don't need the notion of God to make the theorems and the beauty of the things I find to be there. So I think it is cool to have, but personally to me, that's not enough. I think I've heard arguments in several different ways that could go against it. Part of it has to do with the amount of time different universes could have come to being, and there's a tension with it. There's a huge bunch of beautiful, smart science people who care about such things. Personally, it's beyond my realm.
So you almost made me believe in God. And it's only I say that because oftentimes when we have weird coincidences, that for people is, I was just thinking about you and you called, God wanted us to speak. So I've talked about fine-tuning before. Vic Stenger, who is now deceased, was a cosmologist and physicist who wrote a book that addresses fine-tuning stuff. A number of other people have as well. But I'm actually going to give you an answer that I received an email today from my friend David Tamayo, who's the president of Hispanic American Freethinkers. He was recently in a debate where they were discussing fine-tuning, and the basic argument is there's all these constants, and they have to be dialed to these very precise things in order for life to arise. And why is that? Well, my previous answer is, we are not, that's presuming that the universe was created for us rather than we evolved to fit the universe. There are potentially other life forms or other types of life that might have evolved if those things were different. But David made a really good point, and that is, okay, if all of these things have to be just so, how does that get you to a God? Because that means that God had no choice or say-so in the universe that he created. He had to dial those dials to those exact things. And you could do that with a monkey or something arbitrary. It's the physical laws of nature that are dictating what life is. And to say that they had to be thus and so means that God had no options in the universe he created. He had to do it thus and so. So it doesn't become an argument for the existence of God. It almost becomes an argument for the irrelevancy of God.
Yeah, I think that question's a good one to end on, just because it is a microcosm of what we've done here tonight. You can put something up and you can say, well, that one you kind of agreed, but you can say, no, I'm looking at the same exact thing you are, and I see it completely different. That's a chicken and the
That's
egg.
why there are Republicans and Democrats and Greens and
Yeah,
Libertarians.
you guys have been so cordial tonight. Why don't we all say who we're voting for real quick? I'm just kidding. No, sorry. Don't do that. No, I want to say thank you to everyone. You've been kind. You've been great listeners. Did y'all have fun? Was this a good time? So, I want to do a couple things in closing. Just give you a couple things for myself and then give each of these guys a 1-minute sign off, anything else they want to leave you with. But for me and our community right over here, I want to tell you a couple things. I'm not inviting you to church, just listen for just a second. One, if you ever want to talk with anybody about these things, we have things called Q groups. This is not a Bible study, this is other people. So you meet some people, maybe some other people in this room that think different from you, and you say, I'd like to talk about this, and I'd like to have these kind of conversations, because I really want to hear what the other people have to say. If you want to talk about big life stuff, we've got some sign-ups. No pressure. If that's something that sounds like fun to you, we have that. Next thing, our church 3 to 4 times a year, we take off Sunday morning and we serve our community. We don't go pass out tracts. We paint and we spread mulch and we beautify the city we live in because we think that's important. We think that's something God values, and so we don't do it and then hand somebody a tract and say, now you owe us some time. We go do it because we think it's a good thing in and of itself. We've donated thousands of hours to our city. We've been doing this for 4 years. If that sounds like fun to you, or just you have a guilty conscience, either way, October 23rd, so that's just a couple weeks out, you can sign up. We have tons of jobs. It's a no-pressure thing. This is not some weird backdoor evangelism thing. Truly, serving Saratoga, Los Gatos. If you live here, you call this place home, come do it with us. I promise it's fun. We have a big time doing it. We'd love for you to join us doing it. We have a lot of jobs that we're doing. So there's iPads back there. If you want to peruse the jobs and check them out, we'd love for you to come and do that with us. Last thing, I think we have some cards. Bob, if you would like to be on the email for the next time we do this is only our second time doing this. We're trying to get better, and this one was a ton of fun, a lot of success. We're going to do this again. I'm in contact with some of you the Atheist Club in San Jose, and so I'll keep them in the loop, and so many of you know them. We'd like to do this again, and we'd like to have this conversation continue to elevate, continue to hear each other out. And so I think, Bob, do we have a sign up for the next one over there? Okay, we haven't got a date. It's probably going to be February-ish, so keep your ears open. If you hear Village Forum again, this is what it is, okay? So with that, I cede the last minute to each of these guys. Any other closing things, Bob? And Bob, by the way, among with many people, did a lot of work to make this happen. He's passionate about it. Bob, and then Melinda, beautiful lady sitting over there with the scarf, all the food you ate. Thank her for it, yeah. This is a free event that our church underwrites, and so we're so glad that you came. We'd love for you to come back. Guys, final thoughts.
Well, I'll let him get the last word. I don't want to add anything else on the topic that we just discussed. I wanted to say thanks for setting this up and for actually coming and listening. For years, I've said, I want to challenge people. I like to make people think. I like to be made to think. And I like watching that and participating in it, and I think it's a good thing. And so if you leave here with your faith stronger, I'll be a little disappointed, but I will at least appreciate the fact that you were willing to listen. And the primary goal, I'm not trying to, Sethan, right? Mm-hmm. Cool. I avoided saying the name because I was afraid I was getting it wrong. I'm not necessarily trying to say to change his mind or Gabe's mind or anybody else's mind, although I would certainly enjoy that. There's been a lot of negative images of atheists that have come from pulpits for years. There's an atheist group in Austin, Texas, Atheists Helping the Homeless, and they go out and they feed homeless people. You know what the number one question they get asked is? What church are you with? Because the general idea is, oh, this is a church thing, and this is who atheists are. Well, the truth is, atheists are the garbage collectors, the doctors, the next-door neighbors. I know people have lived next to each other for years, had no idea that their favorite neighbor who kept their yard good was actually a godless heathen that they were talking trash about behind their back and didn't know. So I want people to never be able to say, I've never met an atheist. I've never met an atheist who seemed like he thought about or she'd thought about the subjects. I never met a former Christian who seemed to give perhaps good reasons, at least to where I could understand why that person no longer believed. Because the first thing that needs to happen is for us to realize that we're all human beings and that we can be wrong, and we are wrong, and we're all wrong about something almost all the time. And if you're so convinced that you're right, that you're unwilling to even consider what somebody has to say, you're automatically wrong, even if you're right about that topic.
I also wanted to follow up just with a word of encouragement to you guys. I just love closing with this story. It's a story about this guy named Karl Barth. He's a superstar theologian of the 20th century, one of the greatest minds who studied Scripture, this crazy book. And one day he was coming out of church, and this famous astronomer comes to him and he goes, "Professor Barth, isn't it true that all of religion can be summarized in one phrase?" And Karl Barth is like blown away. I mean, not just the Christian faith, the depth and the complexity and the beauty of it, but all religion? He goes, "What is this phrase, my friend?" He goes, "Well, isn't it just do unto others as you would have them do unto you? Isn't that sort of the point of Islam and Buddhism and Christianity? Isn't that the punchline of all these? Just get to the end." And Karl Barth thinks about this. He's wrestled all his life as a great theologian. He goes, "Well, you're an astronomer. Isn't it true that all of astronomy can also be phrased in a small sentence?" This guy's blown away. Black holes, supernovas, gravitational pull. How can you summarize all of this in one phrase? Karl Barth goes, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you..." And the point of it is, there is incredible complexity and depth and beauty. We can actually look at Scripture and say, oh my gosh, so many inconsistencies thrown out. But if you dig a little bit deeper towards any faith, there is amazing things to study that we can easily trivialize if we wish, but I encourage you guys to look for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks so much. That's awesome.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.